Well, thank you so much for everyone for being here. This is awesome. I actually got to see Miranda last night at another fruit meeting, and so we learned a lot about fruit, and I can't wait to learn more about fruit. My name is Lace McCartney. I'm the Ag and Natural Resources educator out here in Hancock County, and Miranda is our horticulture and landscape architecture specialist, especially specializing in grapes, and she especially knows Anya. So I'm going to let her introduce Anya, our guest speaker for the at first. Thanks.
Thanks, Lace. And yes, we're so glad to have Anya Osatuke here. She is the berry specialist for Western New York, and she works for Cornell Extension. And although we wish we could have her in person, we're super glad that she was still willing to join us in this virtual format. She works with berries and small fruits, and today we're excited to have her talk to us about the work that she's done with strawberry yield and quality. So thanks again, Anya, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and I know because of COVID, we've had a lot of pivots to virtual, so I'm glad that this event is still going on, and I hope that this presentation is interesting and relevant. I did my master's research on strawberry quality and the way that management practices affect it for U-pick growers in New York State. So I learned that in Indiana, many berry growers also do a U-pick sort of direct to farm marketing and a little bit of wholesaling. So I hope this is relevant to you. And if it's not, please feel free to ask questions, let me know, because I think managing strawberries for high quality is really important, and it's a great way to keep U-pick customers going. So without further ado, I guess I'll start off by saying that local strawberries have a real flavor advantage over imported berries from what I've seen. Strawberries that are grown for a local market tend to have been bred for better flavor. And instead of that, they have a poor shippability, which makes them juicy and just super delicious to bite into when they're really ripe. Whereas many imported strawberries are bred for being really firm and being really good at being shipped. And so I know in the early 2000s, consumer ratings of strawberries, like from the grocery store, were at an all-time low because they kind of tasted like cardboard. They really weren't being bred to have any good flavor at all. And in the past 20 years since then, I feel like there's been some real improvements in breeding with making those strawberries sweeter, much sweeter than they were before. But in my opinion, local strawberry varieties like AC Wendy, Jewel, just June Bears, Sweet Charlie, they all have just a better aroma to them, and they do tend to have a better juicy flavor in spite of the improvements in imported berries. So I noticed that growers have a lot of options when it comes to investing in the flavor of their berries. And this research sort of takes a look at which ways of investing are actually worth it and will actually give you a payoff versus not. So let's see. I guess let's start off with a survey. Miranda offered to prepare a survey for me. And do you think, Miranda, you could get both of those questions going now? Super. Oh, thank you all for participating. I'm seeing that so far 27 folks have responded, and the survey is still up. I'm noticing that most folks do tend to grow mostly June bears. Some folks do lean mostly to day neutrals, but it's the minority. It's about 11% of everyone here. And then 21%, so about a third of y'all, actually grow a combination of the two. And I think that's really awesome. That probably gives you some really good season extension. And in my talk, I'll talk mostly about June bears, but I did do a little bit of study for flavor in day neutrals. So I hope this will be relevant. But of course, they're just totally different beasts, June bears and day neutrals. So it's good to know what the status is amongst berry growers in Indiana. And now I guess it might make sense to also share the second poll question, if that's all right, Miranda. Yeah, so I'm curious, would you go for better flavor if you knew that you would have lower yields, lower pest resistance, if it were harder to get labor, or if it were harder to ship the berries as a result? So we've got 26 respondents. I think maybe now we can share the poll. So far what I see is that pest resistance is really important. Better flavor isn't worth it if you get a berry that's really susceptible to pests. And the next popular answer is yields. Looks like if you grow a really tasty berry, but it gives you 3 berries off of a plant, it's maybe not worth the investment. Labor availability isn't that big a concern for folks when it comes to flavor. And ability to ship berries is a minor concern as well. It sounds like some folks might not be interested in growing berries that are super tasty if they turn into mush when you ship them. And I think this is really interesting because it's kind of fortunate that many of the breeding programs that do June bearers tend to prioritize flavor and pest resistance as two really important things. In terms of yields, I think some strawberries with really good flavor may have lower yields as a result, but as we'll talk later, we'll find that really getting good yields and getting good flavor are two things that you can accomplish at the same time. But pest resistance is hugely driven by the variety that you select. So it's pretty important to select resistant varieties from the get-go if you want to get good flavor. If you want to get good flavor. So thank you all so much for taking those surveys. Now I'll go on to introduce the research that I did during my master's, where we did a really deep dive into New York State U-pick strawberries. And I found that many New York State growers actually have a similar selection of June-bearing varieties as in Indiana. So hopefully this will also be familiar to you. So I'll start by saying that on average, strawberry fruits take about 30 days from when they're a little green thing to a big red ripe strawberry. So most of the strawberry fruit size and shape actually happens right before the petals fall off. So if you see on the bottom of my screen this picture of these ripening strawberries, most of the cell division actually occurs in between that yellow flower thing and that little green nubbin. And after the petals fall off, most of the growth in the strawberries is actually just the cells expanding, getting full first of starches and of proteins, and then those proteins breaking down those starches into sugars and bringing in water, and really having the fruit become just juicier and redder that way. So when we go for organic or conventional strawberries in the grocery store, one reason we may do that is that organic strawberries are often marketed as tasting better. So really my research there was sort of looking at whether organic strawberries actually taste better and whether investing in organic production practices will actually give you a better flavor for your strawberries. So we wanted to sort of look at that, and we wanted to measure strawberry flavor as the total sweetness, the total tartness of the strawberry, and also we measured the aroma of the strawberries. And so we collected strawberries from many different farms and we measured these factors. And we also had a field trial where we grew strawberries organically, conventionally, and with different levels of nitrogen fertilization to see if we could have any differences in strawberry flavor as a result. So the strawberry that we chose for this study was Jewel. We wanted to stick to one variety because we all know that there's a lot of differences in flavor and in appearance when you start changing up the varieties. So Jewel is the most popular variety grown in New York State. I see that some growers in Indiana also will grow Jewel. I think it's a delicious berry. It's really big. It's a nice mid-season June bearer with pretty poor disease resistance, honestly. It's pretty susceptible to red steel, but we were really looking at flavor for this study. So we found 22 farms across New York State, and every summer for 3 years, we would go down to some of those farms and pick jewel berries and then measure them for sweetness, acidity, and for aroma. We also collected weather data because we thought that that was relevant. And what we found in these farm trials was that there was some pretty big variation in bricks in sweetness from farms to farm, and also from year to year within the same farm. So I have two graphs up here, and we're going to take a moment to understand what the graphs are showing. So on the bottom bar here, Miranda, can you tell me, can you see my cursor when I use it to point?
Yes, we can.
Great, super. So on the bottom here, you can see farm ID. So we wanted to keep the farms anonymous, but farm A on this graph and farm A on this graph is the same farm. And then degrees bricks was the way that we used to measure the sweetness. So on farm A in 2018, we see that we had this bricks of, maybe 5.65. And then the next year, the same farm, same joules, had a bricks that was way higher, almost 10. And then the following year, we had bricks that was just a tiny bit lower than the previous year. And we sort of noticed similar trends across all the farms. The bricks was always lowest in 2018. Then 2019 for some farms was peak, or 2020, but those years folks would just see a much sweeter berries, even though nothing else had changed about the farms. It was just a different year. And then in terms of acidity, we also see that it really just kind of grew from year to year. So we thought that that was pretty interesting because the management practices didn't really change from farm to farm. So we wanted to see what was going on there. But before that, we also simultaneously were collecting data in our fields. So we had two neighboring fields that were planted with Jewel in spring 2018. So we split the fields into 3 major treatments. And then we also had within each treatment 3 levels of nitrogen fertilization and chemical inputs. So we wanted to compare organic versus conventional. I don't know how it is in Indiana, but in New York, you do hear a lot of folks saying we grow strawberries organically and it gives us a really great flavor. So we wanted to check if that was the case. So we had organic, we had conventional. And then I saw that in Indiana also, folks sometimes will prefer to use plastic mulch instead of straw mulch. In New York, historically, we've had straw mulch as kind of the standard mulch that we use between rows to keep weeds down and get the beds ready. But we did want to see, if you use plastic mulch, is there actually any difference in flavor as a result? So that was the other treatment. And we managed those treatments conventionally as well. And we wanted to see how much nitrogen, whether you give strawberries less nitrogen, if that'll actually affect their flavor. So we had level of 50 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare, which is about the same as 50 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Then we had 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre, so double that. And 100 pounds nitrogen per acre for June bearers is the recommended rate of fertilization. For day neutrals, you actually do need to fertilize a little bit more nitrogen than that. And then we had high chemical inputs and low chemical inputs. So some folks will only spray pesticides as needed, and some folks will spray pesticides on a pretty regular rotation to preventatively treat pests. So we wanted to see if that would actually affect flavor in any way. And so I'll just say that all levels had these, all treatments had these levels. So with the organic, of course, you can't spray pesticides on organic, but we had organic biopromoting supplements that we used instead, like a microbial spray that's supposed to help promote plant health and improve disease against pests, that we would spray for the high chemical input organic treatment. And so in the field trial, because we were collecting a little bit more data from those fields, we also could get data on the yield results that we would have based on these different treatments. We'd measure the firmness because we wanted to see if there were any differences in shippability when you have these different treatments. We also took a look at plant health, and we also measured phenolic compounds, which is considered to be a way of measuring how nutritious the fruit is in your diet. We also did a sniff test and a taste test. So we actually had real people sniff the berries and taste them and see if anyone could actually taste a difference there. And what we found, so here's another graph. Basically, I'll start by saying that amongst all the treatments, people weren't really able to taste the difference between any of the treatments. We found that texture was more or less the same in terms of firmness. So whether you grow organically, whether you grow conventionally, the fruits were just as shippable and just as firm. And they were also just as nutritious in terms of phenolic compounds. There were no differences. So we thought that that was really interesting and pretty surprising. There's many differences that you simply can't tell whether you grow organic or conventional. Now, one thing that was really affected by the treatments was actually yields. So what we found was that if you fertilize with high level of nitrogen, with 100 pounds of nitrogen per hectare per year, you would have higher yields for sure. So on the left here, you see these bars with the stripes, and they all have the letter B above them. So those were all of the low nitrogen treatments, conventional, low carbon conventional with the plastic mulch, and organic. And you can see that all of those treatments pretty much had the same lowish yields. And then if you go over to the next set of bars without any of those lines, these are treatments with the 100 pounds of nitrogen per hectare. And the pesticide sprays as needed. So you'll see that when you switch to plastic mulch, you actually do see a bounce in yields if you fertilize at 100 pounds of nitrogen per hectare. But the conventional, for some reason, didn't have that bounce in yields with the straw mulch, maybe because there was a little bit more disease in those plants. With the organic, we actually saw a slight decrease in yields when we fertilized at 100 pounds of nitrogen per hectare. And we're not really sure how to explain that, except thinking that because organic sources of nitrogen are slower to release into the soil, it's possible that even though we put down 100 pounds of nitrogen in the organic treatments, it actually was releasing so slowly that those strawberry plants didn't actually get all that nitrogen that they needed to produce yields that were high enough. And if we look at the last series of bars right here, we see that the conventional with the really regular spray rotations had the highest yields of all the treatments. So straw mulch and regular pesticide sprays seem to be a really good combination for our fields. And then you see also pretty satisfactory yields with the plastic mulch in the conventional, but the organic, even though we added those extra microbial sprays and we really tried to promote plant health using the extra supplements that we invested in, you'll see that the yields really stayed low. And the reason for that, we think, is that the nitrogen levels in those plants were so low that we couldn't get a good yield response. So we took all the data that we collected together, and we wanted to put together the major sources of variation in sweetness. So right now we're looking at a table that sort of shows the different sources we could identify that actually can cause variation in sweetness as long as you're keeping the variety constant. So we see that from one year to the next, you can actually have 70% variation in sweetness just based on the weather during that year. And if you move from farm to farm, so if you change the territory on which you're growing, the soil and all that, you can have about an 18% amount of variation in sweetness in your strawberries. And now system to system, so this is just within our own field experiments that we did, there's only a 1.0 amount of variation, 1% amount of variation as you change from, say, conventional to organic or organic to conventional, or you switch out your straw mulch for a plastic mulch. You can only really expect about a 1% amount of change just as a result of that treatment. But within the field, we also found a fair amount of variation just within plots that were treated exactly the same, but just like sort of the natural variation of the plants for reasons that we really couldn't attribute to anything that we were doing, you saw close to a 9% variation in sweetness that we could observe. So it really looks like weather and location of your farm is like the biggest driver of sweetness in strawberries, keeping variety constant. And when we look at titratable acidity, we see really similar things. Year-to-year variation is 49%. Farm to farm is 17%. So there's a little bit less variation in titratable acidity based on the year. But overall, you know, the location and the weather where you're at are going to be the really biggest drivers of the sweetness and the acidity of your strawberries. And as a result, we also looked at the weather data in our farms because we thought, wow, this year-to-year variation is really big. So we noticed that the total soluble salts, the sweetness of the strawberries, the bricks, were associated with the lowest minimum temperature during the day, during the growing season. So if you have cold nights and if you have warm days, we found that those things together could actually cause greater sweetness in your strawberries. And that made us do a second follow-up experiment with day-neutral strawberries with Albion. So we had some plots with day-neutral Albion strawberries grown under high tunnels. And what we did was we just recorded the weather and the sweetness and the acidity of the strawberries. And we wanted to see whether we can specifically name any weather patterns that can actually drive the sweetness and the acidity of the strawberries. So what we did was we basically measured weather at these different stages of fruit development. We measured from July through November because that's our usual harvest season for day neutrals. And we would measure the strawberry when the buds were forming, that's stage 1. We'd measure when the fruit went from being a fertilized flower to a really small green fruit. Then we'd measure from when the fruit was green to being pink, so the time of active cell expansion. And then we'd also measure during the final stages of ripening when the pink turns red ripe. So here's a picture of those different stages that we were measuring weather during. And we'd measure the sweetness only here in this red ripe stage. Oh, I'm sorry, my stage labels are a little bit offset. This is stage 4 right here. And so here's a graph of what we found. Basically, we found that the amount of hours during the day or during the night when strawberries were exposed to that 7 to 15 degrees Celsius range is really important for increasing the sugar in the strawberry. So I'll actually stay on this slide a little bit longer. So we find that when the temperatures get really hot, like 24 to 32 degrees Celsius, I'm sorry, off the top of my head, I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. But these are like really, really warm summer days, whereas 7 to 15 is like more cool, like night temperatures. Basically, when the temperatures during the day get really warm, we see a decrease in the sweetness. And when the temperatures stay cool, we actually see an increase in the sweetness during the night. And we think the reason why that happens is because strawberries actually have to respire more when it's hot outside, and they actually have to use up the sugars inside of the fruit to keep the fruit alive. But when it's cool, the strawberries can just accumulate those sugars through photosynthesis, and they just keep storing them instead of using them up. And I know that the slope on this graph right here is more steep as it goes down than the slope here. But the reason why we think that is because we just didn't have that many days when it was this warm, but we had a lot of days when it was this warm. So possibly there's this effect where we just didn't have that much data to correlate the sweetness with to these really high temperatures. And basically what we found is that every 5 hours a day, when the temperatures are, closer to that 23 degrees Celsius range, you actually can remove 1 degree of bricks of sweetness in your fruit. So really keeping the strawberries cool can really work to increase your sweetness overall. And our conclusion here is that climate can really serve as an asset for growers. There's a really high amount of variation from farm to farm, and the only way that we could really explain it as terroir, so basically the soil history, the management practices, and probably also the soil type. We know that some strawberries are really responsive in terms of their flavor based on the soil in the farm. So some growers in New York simply can't grow jewel or honeyoy because the strawberry flavor is so strongly affected in a negative way by the soil characteristics. And that basically means that if you're considering trying a new strawberry variety, it's a really good idea to try a small amount to make sure that the flavor actually works well on your farm. We noticed that jewel strawberries are really the sweetest when summers have a mix of cold temperatures at night and hot temperatures during the day. But with Albion, what we notice is that they just really like cold temperatures all around. If your days are kind of cool, like in the fall, that's actually really good for their sweetness. But you also have the thing where in the autumn weather, the yields will also go down. So it's kind of a balance between having the temperatures cold enough for the fruits to be sweet and high enough for the fruits to actually yield enough to be worthwhile. So we recommend growing day neutrals into the fall using low tunnels for retail or U-pick. It sounds from what I've read that you in Indiana may already be doing that, which I think is great, especially because you're a little bit further south than us up here. So probably the weather is more conducive to growing strawberries late into the fall. And overall, investing in temperature management can really be a way to produce sweeter fruits. I think it does also depend a lot on variety. Some varieties can even get white shoulders if the temperatures get too hot during the day, and some growers manage for that by putting mist irrigation on top of the fruits to keep the temperatures lower on the berries. But of course, then you also have to deal with the possibility of molds resulting. So it's always a payoff. And so my conclusions based on this research is that most of all, the most important thing that you can do to grow really flavorful strawberries is to select varieties that have been bred for that. So there's a lot of different really good options. What I like to do when I'm considering a new strawberry variety is to actually Google the name of the variety and look up the patent. So the document that basically says who discovered the strawberry variety, who named it, and how they evaluated it, because those will often describe how flavor was evaluated and how acceptable it is. So that can be a really helpful resource if you're not sure about a new variety. Investing in irrigation can be really worthwhile, whether it's investing in a misting system to keep strawberries cool if you're on a south-facing slope maybe, and you know that your berries get really, really hot in the sun, because they're red and they can actually absorb a lot of extra heat from the sunshine just because of their color. So during really hot days, if you could cool them down a little bit, that can actually increase their sweetness. And also because strawberries, so much of the fruit size is based on the expansion of the cells and the water that they have to become juicy. It can be really huge influence on the fruit quality if you invest in an irrigation system so that you make sure that your strawberries always get the water that they need to grow big and plump. And for season expansion, it can be really nice to use low tunnels. It seems like in the fall for day neutrals, it can be really, really great to have something to keep temperatures a little bit more stable to extend that growing season. And with day neutrals, because at least Albion tends to really like just low temperatures consistently, it can also maybe make sense to use low tunnels to extend the season in the earlier direction, earlier into spring, because they don't really seem to mind it if it's cold and they're still plenty sweet. So those from our research are really meaningful ways to invest in the flavor of your strawberries. Investing in organic fertilizers or a lot of those biological supplements, we couldn't find any way really that those investments actually had to pay off in terms of flavor. But of course, there's many other reasons for people to choose those methods, and we didn't study those, so we can't really speak to them. And with that, that's my presentation. I see there's some folks typing things in the chat, so I'll take a look at the chat box. And I think we have time for some questions and answers as well.
Yeah, that would be great, Anya. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank
And
you.
I can read you the questions so you don't have to sift all the way through it, but we had one question about when is the most helpful time to apply nitrogen?
Right. Oh, great question. So the very best time to apply nitrogen on the fruiting year of strawberries is after renovation and again in the fall. It's not a really good idea to apply a large amount of nitrogen in the springtime before the fruits form and ripen, because we found that springtime applications of nitrogen actually increase the risk of mold issues by like a ridiculous number, like 300%. So applying nitrogen in the fall for strawberries is really good. The only exception for that is if you've had a really rough winter and you think the strawberries just might run out of steam before the temperatures get warm and it's really time for them to fruit, you can apply a really small amount, like 10 to 20 pounds of nitrogen per acre, just to help them get through, but not too much.
Awesome, thank you. And then we had one comment come in just saying that the hardest thing to control is climate. And then another question from Marshall says, what do you use for weed management in your studies?
Oh, thank you for asking, Marshall. So for the conventional studies, we used Devernol for weed management. So that's, I'm sorry, my cat has opinions. That's a pre-emergent herbicide. And then we'd hand weed during the fruiting season, because I don't think you can actually apply any pesticides, including any herbicides during fruiting. And for that reason, I think a lot of our summer interns really preferred the plastic mulch because it just kept weeds down so much better.
That makes sense. We had one question from Maxine. What pH does the soil need to be for strawberries? And are pine needles a good mulch for strawberries in the winter?
Oh, good question. The pH needs to be 6.5 approximately for strawberries. That's like the ideal pH, but they can take a little bit more acid and a little bit more basic. I don't think I've ever seen folks use pine mulch for strawberries. I normally see it used for blueberries because blueberries like it way more acid than that. But I can't imagine it being too bad because I'm not aware of any pests that can be in pine mulch that can attack strawberries. And I know that with straw mulch, one of the issues is you can actually plant it and accidentally bring in weed seeds. And with pine mulch, I imagine that would be a lesser issue. So if you have a lot of pine mulch already and it's affordable for you, I'd recommend it, but I don't think it's necessarily worth spending extra to get it.
Awesome. And we do have time for one or two more questions. The question is from Lisa, and she says, in my Midwest location, we had a brutally cold and dry winter. Do you suggest irrigating as soon as possible? For example, the temperatures will be warm next week, or should she stay the course and wait until spring?
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that about the winter. I think it may be worthwhile to irrigate just a little bit so that the roots don't totally dry out. Not so much that the strawberries are sitting in water for a long time, but I think it may be advantageous for the roots not to be totally dry that whole time. And definitely if you have some kind of mulch on top of the strawberries, it would be good to kind of keep the mulch as dry as you can while irrigating. I know that may be challenging if it's straw or something though. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Anya. We really enjoyed having you here. And I wanted to mention that Wayne Jing and I are actually hosting a Strawberry Chat virtual series. So starting next Wednesday between 12 and 1 p.m., we'll be hosting a Strawberry Chat, and it will be held the first Wednesday of every month. So this was perfect to kind of kickstart the talk about strawberries in Indiana. And so if you're interested in learning more about strawberries, I'll put the link in the chat for you to register. It is free and open to everyone. So thank you again, Anya.
Thank you.
And next up, we have Dr. Elizabeth Long. We're lucky enough to have her to present 2 sessions during the Small Fruit series here of Indiana Horticulture Conference. And today she'll be talking about updates on spotted wing Drosophila activity and infestation risk in Indiana blueberries.
Thank you so much, Miranda. Happy to be part of this series. Hopefully everyone can see my screen okay. So I'm going to continue the discussion of delicious berries. I just want to comment, sadly, like the year of the pandemic was the first year I ever had fresh strawberries, and I totally get how much more amazing they are. So from one delicious fruit to the next, as Miranda mentioned, I'm going to talk about spotted wing Drosophila, an important insect that you likely all are familiar with or have heard about at this point, but focusing specifically on blueberries and some work telling you a little bit about how to manage this insect and some updates from my research team on work they've been doing in Indiana blueberries. Okay, so just a brief outline of the topics I'm going to cover. There's a lot here. I'm going to move quickly through most of it. So I'll just briefly go over the biology life cycle and how to identify the spotted wing Drosophila for those of you who may be less familiar. I'll talk about managing spotted wing Drosophila and small fruit. Again, I'm going to focus on blueberry for the purposes of this presentation, but when we talk about monitoring, sanitation, and managing non-crop hosts, those are kind of going to be the same for various small fruits that this insect attacks. Of course, insecticides will maybe be a little bit more specific, so I'll talk about that just briefly. And then I'll wrap up with some updates from one particular graduate student in my group who's been collecting blueberries, chasing these spotted wing Drosophilas in a couple of places in Indiana, just to give you some updates about the seasonal activity and kind of what we're seeing, some interesting trends with the blueberries. So first things first, spotted wing Drosophila. What do you need to know? Whoops. This is a fruit fly or a vinegar fly that this is a majorly blown up image, but generally speaking, this is what it looks like. We care about it because, of course, it's damaging worldwide to many small fruits, which I'll talk about on the next slide, but it is an invasive insect. And so it's native to China and Japan and was first detected in the United States in 2008. The first kind of suspicion of a trap catch was in 2012, specifically here in Indiana, and then that was officially confirmed in 2013. So this is definitely not a new insect. Anyone who is growing small berries probably has experience with this insect. And what makes it so challenging to manage and different from the native Drosophilids that we have in the Midwest, and there are many, like 14 plus species. What's different about spotted wing Drosophila is that the females actually prefer to attack healthy ripening fruit. So it's sound, it's still on the bush or the vine, and it doesn't necessarily have to be damaged before she is interested in laying her eggs in it. So just kind of going along that same theme, the adults, another reason these flies are so challenging to manage is because they can use many different hosts. I'm just going to focus on the cultivated hosts, the delicious ones we care about. And so early in the season, the female flies can attack cherries. And then when the cherries are done, they just move over to the next delicious fruit. In the middle of the season, those are things like raspberries, blackberries, and blueberries. And then later in the season, they'll move on to grapes. And grapes are not one of their preferred hosts, but they can make their living in there. And then they're overwintering in the woods as adults, just to repeat the same cycle again. So there is some evidence out there that they also attack tree and stone fruits. Also strawberries and, surprisingly, cherry tomatoes, but it's kind of the sweeter cherry tomatoes, which are the ones I like. And just a comment here that these little stars are just representing the berries that are most susceptible to spotted wing, simply because, or research suggests it's because the skins of these fruits are so thin. So it makes it very easy for the females to cut through and lay her eggs inside. So just some pictures of the damage and, of course, why we care, which is surely the reason you're all interested here, not just the biology of this insect. But the females have this specialized egg-laying organ that's basically like a little steak knife on the end of her abdomen, and she cuts into the fruits using that egg layer or ovipositor. and of course lays her eggs. And this is a really nice image taken by Lilac, who I'm going to be talking about more, the graduate student in my group. She lays an egg, and this is under, oh sheesh, I don't know what the level of magnification is, but definitely not visible to the naked eye. But these are little air tubes that are sticking out of a wound that the female fly has made. And these little tubes are what the eggs use to breathe. And if you look for these, you can see them, but obviously they're not visible to the naked eye. So just thought that would be a cool photo to share. So the female cuts the skin, lays an egg in there. You don't know it's there. And obviously this wound is certainly big enough for other pathogens to get in there. In grapes, sour rot is a big one, and potentially also other insects. And the larvae themselves, especially when it comes to blueberries and raspberries, they're in there, trying to grow and live. So they're eating the berries, shrinking its mass down. And nobody wants like maggoty, wormy fruit. So there is no tolerance for larvae in the fruit, not surprisingly. And I'm sure this is something important for those in the audience who do have a U-pick production system. So just a little bit about how to identify these flies, and not to say anybody is going to be anywhere near as enthusiastic as we might be as entomologists doing this. But I'll say first and foremost, a microscope or hand lens is definitely going to be helpful and even necessary, particularly to identify the female. And I bring this up because one of the key monitoring tools we have for this insect requires that you're somewhat able, or at least, hopefully able to identify this insect with the help of a hand lens or microscope. So the easy characters to look for on the male flies, and they have these dark spots, thus the name spotted winged Drosophila, on kind of the upper tips of their wings. And I've looked at a lot of these flies in the traps. If you see enough of them in there, you can see the spots. Some might argue it's easily visible to the naked eye, but a microscope or hand lens will certainly help you see these wing spots. The females are a little different though, and this is challenging again because the female is the one who's laying the eggs and causing the damage. But notice she does not have these wing spots that are so easy to see. Instead, it's this sclerated, oversized steak knife-like egg-laying organ that I mentioned, the ovipositor, that you actually have to look at to confirm that it's the female of this particular species. And you would definitely need a magnifying glass or hand lens to do this. Generally speaking, though, if you have traps and are monitoring for this insect, you don't necessarily need to look for the females. If the males are there, you can see those wing spots, boom, they're there and you need to do something about it. So just briefly, I wanted to mention the life cycle of this insect. And I won't go into detail here, but the upshot of this insect's life cycle is that it develops very quickly. And like other insects, the warmer it is, the faster they develop, and the more life cycles can be completed. So here I say that 8 to 16 days, I'm sorry, this is a figure from online, but 8 to 16 days is all it takes for the spotted winged Drosophila to go from egg to an adult. That's one complete generation. And there are estimates out there that there can be more than 15 generations a year. So the berries are out there, you're really having to, I'm going to use the word fight to keep these flies off your fruits because they're always there and there's a lot of them. So just I'll mention the life stages here. I won't go into detail in the interest of time, that there's the egg with those little breathing tubes that I mentioned. And then there's going to be 3 larval stages, and these are maggots. The first instar maggot, which is really small, and then they're going to get bigger, maybe the size of a rice grain, but a skinny rice grain, up through these 3 stages, each getting larger than the last. Then you'll see kind of this crispy brown, actually rice grain shaped pupa. This is the pre-adult, and this can be found inside the fruits or also in fruits dropped on the ground. And after a few days pass, again, depending on temperature, they emerge into an adult, and this process repeats itself. So there are some questions I've had with growers about using the monitoring traps, which I'll get to in the next few slides. But I often get the question, how far are these flies flying? And there's concern that if they use these traps, these pheromone baited traps that we use for many different types of insects, particularly in orchard systems, that they're going to draw these adult spotted wing flies in. So I just want to point out that there's been some research done in Michigan that the adults, generally speaking, are weak flyers. So if they're in good shape, meaning they're not starved, they've had a good food source, on their own, they can maybe fly about 100 meters. And I'm not saying that's trivial, but it's certainly not miles and miles. If they're assisted by the wind, So there's a perfect weather day for them to move them the longest distance possible with assistance. They're going to be traveling about half a mile. Whoops, I forgot to add the word mile. So about half a mile is the farthest these flies are going to move with assistance from the wind. So just an important point I wanted to make there. I also mentioned before that there are other species of these fruit and vinegar flies that occur naturally. They're native to our area here in the Midwest. So if you see larvae in the fruit, it doesn't necessarily mean it's spotted wing Drosophila. If it's early in the season and the berries aren't ripe yet, or they are ripening, then they probably are spotted wing. But just to point out, you can't ID spotted wings purely by looking at the maggots and assuming that you wanted to. And a point that I always like to make, the larvae are true maggots. Like these, you can't tell the head from the bum. And if that's the case, it's a maggot of some kind. So just to point that or distinguish that from other insects that may also appear in the berries, because sap beetles or picnic beetles that some of you may be familiar with and all kinds of small fruits, they will show up and feed in the berries too, especially if there's been damage and they start to sour a little bit. And the larvae of those beetles will have legs, and you'll be able to tell the head from the bum. Okay, so just a little bit, the final slide here about the biology and life cycle of this insect. Based on information that I've been able to find, spotted wing Drosophila, the adults, typically we start to see them attack or come after blueberries around the third cover stage. And adults are mostly active at dawn and dusk, and they prefer shaded, humid environments within the plant canopy. And I point this out for those of you who may be trying to be strategic and really nail these adults by spraying at the right time. So they're going to be resting within the canopy of whatever small fruit you may be growing. And when they're active at dawn and dusk, actually, what am I trying to say here? This is the time when dawn and dusk is when they're going to be active and flying around. So that's when you want to spray and make sure your products are in place when they may be coming into contact with your fruits. There are several natural enemies for the spotted wing Drosophila. Right now, the most recent information I know from the USDA is that they're working with these parasitic wasps, tiny stingless wasps that could come after the pupal stage of this insect, but this is currently being done under quarantine. So to my knowledge, we have not released that. It's not being used nationwide yet. So stay tuned for that. So now I'll just mention briefly some tips for monitoring spotted wing Drosophila in small fruit. And I have 4 items listed here, but I'm not going to talk about them all. So I just want to mention in the next few slides, I'm going to emphasize monitoring the adult spotted wing Drosophila population that may be in your area. So I'm going to focus on the adults using these, monitoring the adults using these baited traps. There's also what's called a saltwater test for basically putting your berries or fruit into saltwater in a container and seeing if larvae float up. This is really, really important to determine how the level of infestation of your berries, or the flip side of that is using the saltwater test to confirm that you're really doing a good job with your spray program or whatever management strategy you're using. I'll also mention very briefly sanitation, because this is so important. I do have a single slide with some insecticides that are specific for blueberry. And then this last point, there has been excellent work out of Michigan State and other states too, but Michigan State is where I'm most familiar, where they've looked at alternative or non-crop wild hosts that spotted wing Drosophila can use to survive. And there is some evidence that removing these alternative hosts can help manage the population, but obviously that's extremely tedious. And it's just even more work on top of what you're already probably doing in your small fruit orchard. So I'm not going to talk about this specifically, but if folks have questions, please feel free to reach out and I can follow up with you by email. So talking about these traps, there are lots of options. This insect's been here long enough. A lot of people have done research into these tools for monitoring them. And these tools are really the foundation of these tools. How they work is that they smell like the spotted wing Drosophila's preferred host. We don't know everything that's in the lure, but there's something attractive to them that draws them to this trap. And so it's purely, the goal of this trap is to be used as a monitoring tool. So I don't have any do-it-yourself traps here, but again, I can share that information if anyone's interested. These commercial traps are really effective and not that expensive, although that depends on how much you're monitoring. But I'm going to give the example here of these commercial sentry traps. and this lure, which kind of looks like a jelly packet that hangs inside the lid. And this smells like the most potent, intense bag of salt and vinegar chips you've ever experienced. Like, this will make your eyeballs tingle. It's so strong. But this is the odor that the flies are attracted to. And you can buy these traps at GreatLakesIPM.com. So just in a nutshell, I'll say these traps are effective. They're pretty easy to use. You know, you put the trap, or you put the lure on this hanger, you put the lure inside this container, you add a liquid at the bottom. This could be just water. It could be 25% apple cider vinegar. So that's a 1-to-4 ratio of vinegar to water, or 100% apple cider vinegar. And there is some differences in the level of sensitivity, or how much these different liquids attract the flies, but ultimately it's the lure that you're using. So I wouldn't worry too much about which liquid or drowning solution you have. But the idea is that the flies are attracted to the trap by this little jelly packet lure, and they bump around inside because there's holes on the sides. You can't quite see it in this image. And they bump around in there, they can't get out, and eventually they fall into the bottom and they drown. And then the recommendation is, if you find a single adult in the drowning solution, and you have berries that are in the ripening stage, or what I'll call the vulnerable stage, you need to make a decision about taking action. So I think those, and I just mentioned here, roughly the trap itself, $9 a trap. And these can be used repeatedly season after season. And then the lures are about $8 each. And these last for a month before you need to replace them to maintain that strong attraction for the flies. So depending on, how familiar you are with this insect and, the monitoring, whether you're using these tools or not, I just wanted to provide a few scenarios and some actions that can be useful for growers in the audience. So if you've never had spotted wing on your farm or in your orchard, it's recommended that you use this baited trap to monitor the adult flies. Remember, this trap only detects the adults because the larvae don't have wings and they can't fly, and they're in the berries. So you'll want to use these traps, check them weekly or all season until the first detection of the adult. That tells you, especially if your fruits, again, are vulnerable, you need to take action once you find that first detection. If you've had this fly on your farm or orchard in the last year, use the baited trap for the adult flies until the first catch of the new year. So that's, again, the importance of this tool is an early detection tool. You know it's there. And then based on that capture, determine when the spray schedule should start. And this is because this is a little different from this above recommendation, because you know now that spotted wing is in your area and it's not going to just disappear, it's there. And then if you've just found it for the first time, or if you've already found it in your orchard, although the timing's a little off because clearly no one's growing any berries right now, but if we were in the growing season and you did find spotted wing Drosophila in the monitoring traps, then the recommendation would be to use that saltwater test weekly on berries that you select at random, and see how many larvae float to the surface using this saltwater test. And again, this is really a way for you to determine if your spray program or your control program is effective in reducing the pressure on the berries, and by pressure, I mean the adults laying the eggs, because that's what you want to eliminate. So just like with any small fruit or any fruit production system, sanitation is so important. I recognize this can be extremely labor intensive and not feasible for everyone, but I still feel like I have to share some important points about the sanitation in terms of managing spotted wing, but also other small fruit insect pests. So as we all know, if you can keep things clean, you're going to eliminate food resources for pests. So in this case, do your best to try to keep dropped fruits, decaying fruits off the floor of your orchard or between rows. The more you allow those to accumulate in the field, even though we won't eat them and they're not good enough for maybe customers coming in for the U-pick, the flies have no problem laying their eggs in those berries, living life, and then eventually emerging to infest the berries that are still up on the bush. Destroy any leftover fruit after harvest as soon as you can. And there is some work from folks, this is mainly from grape systems or vineyard systems, where folks can place the culls in clear plastic bags and leave them to bake in the sun because that kills the insects. Obviously, this can be extremely tedious, but just putting it out there because we know it can be effective. And most importantly, this is more effective than just burying culled fruit under the soil surface, because I think the most recent research shows even if you bury those low quality culled fruits, I think 12 inches below the soil, these flies can still survive and come out, which is crazy. So when it comes to actually harvesting the fruit, as soon as it's ripe, harvest it promptly and chill it if possible. So for those of you who may have larger U-pick operations or, maybe shipping your fruit somewhere, chilling that fruit is so critical for many reasons. But in the case of spotted-winged Drosophila, that can actually kill the eggs and reduce the survival of the young larvae, the young maggots, I should say, in the berries. So I just have a brief list here of insecticides that are labeled for spotted-winged Drosophila, specifically in blueberry. And I won't go through this in detail, but what I want to draw your attention to are these different colors here. The green box up here, these are the organophosphates. In purple here, the pyrethroids, and then finally delegate and entrust being an OMRI listed or organically approved insecticide. And some of you, depending on whether you have a commercial applicator's license, some of you may have more options than others. And if you have questions about this, please feel free to reach out. But I do want to bring your attention to the PHI, or the pre-harvest interval. And this is so important, particularly for those of you who do have U-pick operations. You want to make sure you get those sprays on and you allow enough time between that spray and the pre-harvest interval that it's safe for people to eat the berries. It's safe for people to go in there and be picking the berries from your orchard. So obviously, many of you probably already know this, but I always like to emphasize this. Okay, so now I'm just in the last 10 minutes or less. I'm going to just share some brief research updates from my group in terms of work that we've been doing on spotted-winged Drosophila here in Indiana. So when I say we, this is really the royal we. I want to highlight my master's student, Lilac Hong, who has been leading the effort on this project and is really just doing a great job and super enthusiastic about this insect. So generally speaking, we've known spotted wing has been here for a while, as I mentioned, since 2013. And there's a lot of work that's been published about this insect in regions surrounding ours. And so one of the questions that's kind of driving her master's work is, is there anything about spotted-winged Drosophila activity in Indiana? Should we expect it to be the same as it is in other north central regions, for example, Wisconsin or Michigan? And some other questions we might answer just that go along with this general question. So here's the state of Indiana, and I'm here in Tippecanoe County. We actually partnered with some cooperators that are growing blueberries and have U-pick operations in Tippecanoe County and also Stark County. So a big shout out and thank you to those cooperators. We would not be able to have done this work without them. So she used these commercial sentry traps that I mentioned before with that lure and the diluted apple cider vinegar drowning solution. And she placed them at orchards in these two locations in Indiana and monitored those traps, counting how many adult flies appeared over time from May 14th to August 31st. And I just want to point out there were 3 key blueberry varieties that were similar between these 2 orchards where we were working with cooperators, Blue Ray and Blue Crop blueberries. And these are the earlier fruiting varieties, and then Elliott, which is a later fruiting variety. And some of the general questions that we wanted to ask using these commercial sentry traps. Can we use these traps? We're already using them as a monitoring tool to detect when adults are present for the first time in the season. Maybe we can use the seasonal activity or number of adults that occur in these traps as a tool to predict spotted-winged Drosophila activity in blueberry growing regions in Indiana. And another question we had, and this is more kind of correlative data, the intriguing, interesting stuff that we found just from this past summer, our first year of data, might there be any differences between varieties? And here, I mean, blueberry varieties in terms of spotted-winged Drosophila damage. So do they prefer maybe one of these varieties over another? And I don't have the answer to that question, and we may not get it, but I do have some interesting results to share. So what I'm showing you here is if we look at the total number of flies that were collected all season long in each of those 2 locations in Tippecanoe County and Stark County, Indiana. I don't know what the number is off the top of my head, but I know it's in the thousands. Here on the y-axis, I'm showing you the proportion of trap catch during the season, and then cumulative degree days. And so for those of you who don't know, cumulative degree days basically take into account an insect or pest but in this case, spotted wing Drosophilia's kind of window of development. There's a lower temperature and a higher temperature when these flies can develop, and that contributes to how quickly they can complete a life cycle or a single generation. So cumulative degree days throughout the season, as it gets warmer, degree days are going to accumulate more quickly, and we would expect these insects to develop and their populations to grow more quickly. And that's certainly what you're seeing in these two figures. Oh, let me just also mention, if you look at this cumulative degree days from left to right, maybe this is intuitive, but for anyone who it may not be, as we're moving from left to right, we're going from early in the season to later in the season. So what you can see between these two counties is these two locations in Indiana. We generally see a similar type of pattern, this S-shaped curve, where we don't really see a lot of activity, but there's a key period where things really pick up. And this is where I'm going to say the slope of the line is very steep. So we see this kind of similar pattern, which doesn't differ that much. I don't know that I was necessarily expecting it to, but this is what we found so far. And this is the data that we're collecting from these monitoring traps and hope to continue to develop, to collect in order to develop a better model. So when I say making predictions based on these results, here's what I'm getting at. So if we look at the percent of adults detected in West Lafayette and North Judson in each of these counties respectively, the first detection occurred at the West Lafayette location. I guess I should have put Tippecanoe County here. Sorry for any confusion. But this occurred at 610 cumulative degree days. So somewhere right around in here. That was when flies were first detected in the Tippecanoe County location. But you'll notice it happened much earlier in North Judson, right around 356 cumulative degree days. And these are the actual calendar dates where this occurred in 2021. So this is interesting. We think that this earlier detection may be the result of the surrounding landscape. And in Stark County, where the orchard was, it was a heavily wooded area, or the orchard is surrounded by a heavily wooded area. And so we know that the adults overwinter in the woods. So maybe they were just there in greater abundance and ready to emerge and come out into the orchard when conditions were right. So looking at these models, here's where I think it would be useful for growers. And again, this is a work in progress. But we're hoping that we can develop a model like this so that growers can know, at this point, in this case, a little over 1,100 cumulative degree days, 25% of adults that we would have detected all season are already present in the trap. And maybe this would be the time, probably earlier, you don't want to wait that late, maybe somewhere down in here when the numbers first start to grow. When is the key time to take action against these insects so that we can reduce the likelihood or ability for these populations to grow so quickly? And so, in this case, we're showing here 50% of the population, that of the cumulative proportion of the trap catch, 50% of all the flies we detected, that's what I'm trying to say, was found here at this point during the season. And of course, waiting this late to take action is probably going to be really detrimental. So we're really excited about this, hoping to take this information, continue to collect the flies and count who we see in the traps as a way to fine tune this as a predictive tool to tell growers, help growers make an informed decision about when to take action. Oh, I should also mention, I'm so glad I have this animation in here. That's supposed to be a blueberry that bounced out. Interestingly, the first detection of spotted wing occurred at 356 cumulative degree days, if you'll remember, in Stark County in North Judson. However, the first ripe fruits weren't available in the orchard until about 640 cumulative degree days. So I highlight this to really emphasize the point that the flies are there well before the fruits are ripe. And this is why it's so important to use that monitoring tool to detect them early, even if your fruits are not ripening yet. This is a really powerful predictive tool. Okay, so just some interesting findings that we found very briefly. Here I'm showing you the number of egg scars on the fruit. Again, this is what those pictures look like with the little tube sticking out so the eggs can breathe, relative to the number of adult flies captured in the trap. And regardless of blueberry variety, here, this is all blueberries that we collected combined, Blue Crop, Blue Ray, and Elliott. What we see is that, not surprisingly, as you have more adults in the trap, you also have more eggs laid in the fruit. And this is regardless of the blueberry variety. And this is also kind of designated here with this positive slope, this line that's going upward as we increase the number of adults detected in the traps. So not necessarily surprising, but just to let you know, more adults in the trap, more eggs in the fruit, regardless of the variety. Some interesting findings, though, that we found, focusing only on Elliott. If we look at the average number of egg scars, or eggs in this case laid in the berries, relative to the average berry weight, we see a negative relationship here. And I should say this is actually correlation. So we don't know this for a fact. We need to continue to replicate this. But this is a strong trend just based on 1 year of data. And what we see here is that the larger the berry, only in the case of Elliott, the Elliott variety, these larger berries have fewer eggs laid in them. So that's pretty interesting, because I would expect a larger berry has more fruits, more deliciousness for the larvae. So if we look at another correlation and we look at the relationship between average berry weight, again, focusing only on Elliott blueberry varieties, and average Brix, or in this case, sugar content, we see that just from our data from the past summer, the larger berries, when it's an Elliott variety, are less sweet. And I think this is really interesting because we know that sugar content matters to spotted-winged Drosophila. So this kind of, our thinking, the interesting upshot of all of this is that it seems that smaller, sweeter Elliott berries are preferred by spotted wing. I shouldn't say preferred, but that's kind of what I'm getting at here, because they're sweeter. So I think that's a pretty interesting finding that we found just from this past summer. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. I think I have 14 seconds left according to my timer here, but I just want to encourage folks to please use these monitoring traps to improve detection of spotted-winged Drosophila adults in your orchard. And this is really going to help you improve the timing of your management strategy. Specifically, no need to start spraying if they're not detected yet. And maybe what you spray at the beginning of the season may be influenced by whether or not you see adults in the trap, right? So maybe using your best tools up front to manage the population. We'll continue to do this work in the blueberries this upcoming summer. And if you are a blueberry grower, particularly in the southern region of Indiana, and would like to partner with us, please reach out. We're really interested in whether activity may differ as we look vertically across the state. We might expect things to happen more slowly in the north than in the south, although that's not necessarily what we found so far. But we can't be sure if we don't have a southern region represented. So if you are interested, please reach out to us. And with that, I do have a poll question. And it's basically a question to ask how much you feel you've learned from this presentation. And I'll let that go for a moment. And thank you for posting that poll question. And I'm going to move on here just to provide my contact information if you are interested, if you do have questions, if there were things I left out, because I know I had to blow through some of that. And also just want to point out that the 2021-22 Midwest Fruit Pest Management Guide that does have recommendations for spotted-winged Drosophila in blueberries, this is available. You can't get it as a hard copy, but you can get it as a free PDF download at this website. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions if there is time. As usual, I ran right up to the last minute there.
No, that is perfectly all right. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I always learn something new. And we do have a few questions in the chat. The first one is, does spotted-winged Drosophila also attack elderberries?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know off the top of my head, but my gut says yes, because elderberries are delicious and they've been found to survive in pokeweed berries, which are basically poison. So if they're living in those, I'm willing to bet some change, or actually not chump change, that they can survive in elderberry.
Awesome. Thank you. And then we have a question. Someone has a small patch of blueberries, and the berries that are soft, they put it into a cup with soapy water to drown the larvae. They're wondering, how cold do you need to chill them, because they've seen worms in berries even after they've been in the refrigerator for a few days?
That is a great question. And I would actually have to get into the literature and the specific studies that have looked at that specific question. I'll tell you though, what I suspect you're seeing, and I've seen too, even though eating the maggots is a little gross, there's extra protein. So pro insect eating. Anyway, well, not all insects, but so the timing of when you chill those fruits is so critical. So remember, I mentioned there are 3 maggot stages. The first stage and the second stage, they're smaller, they're less, they're more vulnerable to being chilled. That stops their development, it kills them. Once they get to the big, meaty, the Mac Daddy final stage, final maggot stage, it's much harder to kill them by by just cooling them down. So that could be what you're seeing with those maggots still being active. But if that person would be willing to reach out to me by email, I will look into that answer and I can and be in touch with them, because I know that's a food safety question that I should know the answer to, but I can't think of it off the top of my head.
All right. Thank you. And then we have a question about, what do they overwinter in?
Oh, that is a great question. So, and one that fascinates me. So as I mentioned, the spotted-winged Drosophila overwinters as an adult fly. It's amazing. They're so tiny. They basically just find a protected place. It could be under some loose bark, maybe under, well, depending on what kind of tree. They'll overwinter in leaf litter. They just kind of sit there and they find a protected place, and that's all they do. They don't feed. They're not flying around. They're just basically trying to survive the winter as an unfrozen insect, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So they're not actually like, it's not a particular host or anything. It's just a protected area, usually leaf litter or in the woods that they're overwintering. And then they'll come back out and hit the berries whenever the temperature warms up enough for them to be active.
Awesome. And then the last question we have, is there a map of Indiana that shows known locations of spotted wing?
Oh, that is a great question. I know that we have an invasive species. I can't think of the acronym. Oh, cooperative. Okay, it doesn't matter what the acronym is. I know we have folks monitoring in the past for this insect, especially when it was new, a newly invasive insect. I'll have to look that up. I know we have a list of counties. I'm not sure it's on a website or a nice county map, but that's something we could certainly put together pretty easily. I didn't answer the question, sorry. I suspect it's around at this point.
Great. Well, if anyone has further questions, feel free to get in contact with Elizabeth. And I want to thank you again for being here. And next up, we have Dr. Sushila Chaudhari, and she's an associate professor at Michigan State University that specializes in weed science. So today she'll be talking with us about weed management in blueberries. Hi, Sushi. We are ready for your presentation if you are.
Thank you very much for inviting me for this talk. So I am Sushila Chaudhari, and I am an assistant professor here at Michigan State University. I work with the weed management in specialty crops that include both fruits as well as vegetables. So today we'll talk about the weed management updates in blueberry. So in this presentation, first of all, I will talk about the herbicides that we use for weed management in blueberries. And after that, I would like to talk about a new herbicide that we are evaluating here in Michigan for weed control in blueberry. So I want to show those results. And then in my third part of presentation, I will show you some of the results that the study I did to evaluate the response of the blueberry cultivars for sulfentrazone pre-emergence application. And sulfentrazone is an active ingredient in Jewess herbicide or Jewess prime herbicide. So as you know, we all know that it is very important to manage weeds in blueberry, because if we don't manage them, then they can compete for the water, nutrient, as well as light with the crop, and they can reduce the crop quality as well as crop yield. So it's not only they just reduce the crop quality and yield, they also harbor the some diseases as well as pests. And they can reduce again the fruit quality and diseases. So therefore, it is very important to manage our weeds in blueberry. So this is a really nice table that I published last year that has information about all the herbicides that has been registered to use in our blueberry production system. So all of that herbicide that I have mentioned here are based on the Michigan registration. So if you want to use any, then please just check that those products are registered in Indiana as well. Because, sometimes we have those special 24C label, like for example, for dual magnum, we have a special 24C label here in Michigan to use. But I don't think so Indiana has that label or not. So just to make sure, whenever you are referring this table, you are also checking your label so that you know that the product you are using, it's registered to use in Indiana as well. So this this table gives a really nice overview of the herbicide that we have. And by looking this, we can see that there is a good herbicide portfolio that we have to use in our blueberry. So mainly, the first few herbicides that we can use in at the dormant stage, like Allion, Sinbar, Curb, Solicum, Davernol, Trellis, Carmex, Princep, and Velpar. These are kind of the products that is used in fall or in spring. And then some product like Chateau, Juice Prime, Matrix, Sandia, Dual Magnum, Embed Extra, Glyphosate, Post, Fusilade, AIM. These we can use during the season as well. So in this table, I have also included the pre-harvest intervals related to each of these products. So I always find this table very useful whenever I get any question regarding the blueberry herbicide. Another resource that I use a lot is the Michigan Fruit Management Guide. We have a herbicide section here for the blueberry. And in that section, we have a really nice table that represents the herbicide. Those are mentioned or registered to use in blueberries. And we update this table every year. And also along with that, we have a herbicide efficacy tables for weeds also, some of the most problematic weed species. So I would also recommend to use this book, if you have any query related to the herbicide use in blueberries. So the main key point that we want to keep in mind whenever we are designing a herbicide program for our blueberry production is that we always need to make our application timely. So, and we generally recommend at least 3 applications, like during spring, fall, and during the summer, or that's we call during the season. And it is very important, to use your pre-emergence product, because pre-emergence or residual herbicide, because sometimes these products has or can be only used in spring and fall. So if we are going to miss this window, then we cannot use these products and we'll have a lot of weeds. So just, include those pre-emergence herbicide in your fall and spring application timing. And at least, use 3 different types of residual herbicide whenever you are making your herbicide program, and always follow the label instructions. So for example, these are the weed control plan for the blueberries. Like for early spring, it's better to have a PS2 inhibitor like Carmex, and then PPO inhibitor, Juice or Roundup, a combination. And then in late spring, you can use the, if for some reason, if you weren't able to make the spring application, or this application, early spring application can go in the fall as well. So the late spring application can have the PS2 inhibitor or another PPO inhibitor, and then Gramoxone and Rely. And in mid-season, depending upon the weed, you can use the Matrix, Sandia, or any of the grass killer like Post or Slackmax or Fusilade. And then in the fall, again, Curb and Salicom are really good. If you have, the quack grass issue, then Curb is really good to use in the fall as for its control. And then, next year, always you can rotate your herbicide like Allion, Callisto, Solicam, Surflan, and Casaron. These are most of them, or actually all of them has a pre-emergence activity. So you can use them for your spring or fall application timing. So now I just going to talk about the herbicide that has been recently registered in blueberry in last 5 years. So these are the products are Allion, Tralles, Quenstar, Embed Extra, and Fusilade. These are the products that we have recently got registration. So I'll talk about each of that product in detail. So Allion is a cellulose synthesis inhibitor. It belongs to group 29, and it has a really good activity for the grasses as well as for the broadleaf. And the one good thing about Allion is like it has a long residual activity period. So sometime if you sprayed Allion, you can, like in the spring, you can see the effect of that application even in the following spring. So the application should be made either in the fall or in early spring before the bud break. Another herbicide that got registered is Tralles, and this belongs to group 21, and it is also a pre-emergence herbicide or residual herbicide. So when I'm saying pre-emergent or residual herbicide, it means those herbicide does not control already emerged weed. They only have the activity for the weeds, those are not started growing yet or not germinating yet. And it can be used in fall and spring, again, before your weeds emerge. And the PHI for this product is 60 days, and it can control only the broadleaf weed. Tralles does not have any activity for the grasses. So just to make sure, if you are using the Tralles in your program, then you mix the another product that has a grass activity like Surflan or Solicam. Quenstar is another product. It belongs from group 4. It's a synthetic auxin herbicide, and this needs to be applied before bud break or during season up to 30 days prior to the harvest. And this has activity for several broadleaf weeds. Like one of the weed that can be controlled with this product effectively is field bind weed, because Quenstar has a really good activity for the field bind weeds. Other than that, it can control the lamb squatter, horseweed, mustards, nightshade, pigweed, ragweed, Canada thistle. And this is one of the auxin product that has activity for grasses too, like barnyard or large crabgrass and foxtail. Because most of the product, that we have from group 4, they have only activity for the broadleaf weeds. But Quenstar is one of the unique one that has activity for the grasses as well. Another product that recently has been registered is Embed Extra, and this is the 2,4-D choline salt. So in general, we don't recommend to use any another formulation of 2,4-D in blueberry, because they can cause a significant amount of injury. But this choline formulation is registered to use in blueberry due to its low volatility as well as due to its low drift characteristic. So it should be used in spring, and in summer the raw middle application can be made, and it should be used before flowering. And the another thing is like this, this is really good for controlling annual and perennial broadleaf weeds, such as all the mustards, pigweed, ragweed, smartweed, bindweed, wild carrot, dandelion, plantain, and has some level of activity for the wild grape as well as for ivy, poison ivy. So you might see there are two different, trade names for this 2,4-D choline formulation. One is Embed, another one is Embed Extra. So embed is registered to use in another fruit crops like apple or tree nuts. However, embed extra is the one that is registered to use in blueberry crops. So it's always, important to know which trade name you are using in your blueberries. Another herbicide that recently got registered is fusilade, and this is another graminicide. It belongs to group 1, and it has a good activity for the perennial grasses. It has a good activity for the quack grass, if that is one of your main issue. And it has a really short pre-harvest interval, which is 1 day. And, similar to other graminicide like post or slackmax, its activity improved when we add adjuvants like crop oil concentrate or NIS. So with that, I'm concluding my presentation, like the section where I was going to talk about mainly about the herbicide used in blueberry. Now I will talk about the project that we are doing here in Michigan for evaluating another new herbicide, fluorpyroxyfan in blueberry. And so this is another group 4 herbicide, which is synthetic oxane, and it has a really good activity for several of our broadleaf weeds. Like it's really good for controlling the horseweed or saw thistle or prickly lettuce, field bindweed, and also has some activity in grasses as well as in sedges. So the main reason why we were interested in this product to evaluate in blueberries is because the use rate is very low, and also, it has a low ecotoxicology impact. And EPA, what they have mentioned, that this, for registration of this product in any new crop, we only need a crop safety and efficacy data. There will be no residual data needed for registration of this product in any of the crop. So what does that mean? That means that if we prove that it is working really good in our blueberry, then the time period it will allow us to use in blueberries is very short. It will be registered within 2-3 years, as long as we will say or have the good data to show that the crop safety is good. At this point, this product is registered to use in rice, mainly for controlling the, those aquatic weeds, and also has some registration for the pasture and land management cereal in orchid crops, as well as in vegetable and some other specialty crops. So to evaluate this, we have conducted this study in Michigan, in Fenville. And I just want to mention that it's like there are some another states also, like North Carolina, Oregon, and New Jersey are also involved, and they have also doing the same study. So it means that if we have this, the crop safety and weed control data from all of these states, then it will be easy for pursue for the labeling this new product in our blueberries. So we conducted our study last year in a blue crop blueberry variety, and then standard, we used the RCBD design with 3 replication. Our soil type was loamy fine sand, and then we harvested our blueberries 4 times from July to August. So in this trial, what we had evaluated 2 different rates of loint, and these rates we applied at 2 different timing. The PO1, which is early fruit set, and then the second application was made when fruits were turning blue in color. And along with that, we have one more thing that we wanted to evaluate, that is there any difference in terms of crop safety when we are applying this herbicide with shielded as well as non-shielded boom. So the first 8 treatments we used the shielded boom. However, for the 9th and 10th treatment, we used the non-shielded boom. So overall, from this trial, we wanted to know like what application timing is good. Is it good to make 2 applications per season? And also we wanted to know that does it make in terms of crop safety and weed control any difference when we are using the shielded as well as non-shielded boom. So I'm sorry, I have a lot of data here in one table, but in general, what we find out that in terms of the weed control, all of the rates provided good, especially for the marsh tail as well as the red sorrel. And these were the 2 mainly weed species we had in our study area. So these are just some of the pictures. This is when we applied the lower rate of loint. So these are you can see how these red sorrel are showing yellowing. And this is the horseweed that is kind of curled up and will die soon. This is with the plot with 32 fluid ounce per acre. And other than that, we were mainly concerned about what kind of the impact it has on our blueberry crop. So what we noticed that it does not causing any injury to the old shoot. However, it was causing a significant amount of injury on our new shoots. You can see this leaf distortion as well as curling of these new shoots. So, and you see that some of them are getting red also. So mainly this type of injury we noticed, and we noticed higher level of injury when we applied 2 applications in one season as compared to when we applied only 1 application. So, when we applied, especially when we applied the later application, we have a significant amount of higher injury. And when we applied these both rates at both application timing, then also we had a significant amount of injury. However, we also collected the yield data. So during the first year, we did not see any impact of those applications on our yield. And the reason could be, as I mentioned, that the mainly injury we observed in the old shoot. So that could be in the new shoots. So that could be one of the reasons that the growth on the old shoot was not got impacted with this herbicide. We are going to do this trial next year as well. To making ensure that this is safe and not going to cause any yield reduction. So I'm hoping to see more, clarification about this product and their impact on the blueberry yield next year. So in general, the summary from this trial is that it provided a good control of red sorrel and horseweed, and the 2 sequential application and the later season application cause higher injury as compared to the early season application. And we didn't find any, impact of the application method on crop safety as well as on weed control data. So regardless of we are using the hooded boom or non-hooded boom, the injury and crop weed control was same. And there was no impact reported on crop yield from the application rate, timing, or application method. I'll try to sum up the next one very quickly. So the reason, why I was interested doing in this project, because when I joined at MSU in 2020, so there was some grower having some injury when they were using juice in their field. So we were just trying to figure out what is the reason that they are having injury. So is it related to the herbicide rate that they have used, or is it related to the adjuvant they are mixing in that product, or is it related to the blueberry cultivar? So therefore, we did this trial in 2020 and 21 in a greenhouse. So in this trial, what we used a soil that was collected from the blueberry field. And we had a blueberry crop as well as Elliot. These are the two different varieties. So all of the plants of blueberry and Elliots were 3 to 4 year old, except some of the plants in Elliot that we used is 1 to 2 year old. And then these plants were transplanted into these 1.5 big gallon pots and let them grow at least for 3 or 4 months before we made any application. So these are the plants, they were 3 to 4 year old, and these are the plants, they were like 1 to 2 year old. So the application we made, the rates we included is from 8 to 32 fluid ounce per acre of Jewess that was alone. And also we applied it with surfactant. This ORO root zone is one of the surfactant that grower use when they are using the pre-emergence herbicide. So we have applied that along with these different rates. So I just want to show you like what we noticed after 2 weeks of application. So, this is the highest rate of 32 fluid ounce per acre 2 weeks after application. So these are the pictures from the blue crop, and these are the pictures from the Elliot, and these are the pictures from Elliot. Those were 1 to 2 year old, and these were from 3 to 4 year old. So what we find out that there was a significant high amount of injury that we noticed when the Elliot is 1 to 2 year old. And, with time, these 1 to 2 year plants were getting more injury. However, these 3 to 4 year blue crop as well as Elliot plants are recovering from these injuries. So in general, what we find out from this trial, we evaluated the crop injury, we measured the height, also we measured the biomass. So we find out that blue crop was not showing that much of injury. However, Elliot was showing a little bit higher injury, and that injury also impacted the crop height. And in terms of herbicide, the highest rate, 32 fluid ounce per acre was causing injury when we applied alone or when we applied with the surfactant. But all other rates were kind of, we didn't find any significant amount of injury. So in summary, what we got from this trial is that Elliot was reported more sensitive to Jewess than blue crop. And, and that is the main reason that the Jewess or sulfentrazone should not be used in young Elliot plant. Those are less than 2 year old because they can cause a significant amount of injury. And significant amount of higher injury was reported when, sulfentrazone was applied at 32 fluid ounce per acre. And just want to tell you that this 32 fluid ounce per acre is the 4x rate. So at the label rate, sulfentrazone reported safe to both blue crop and Elliot variety, regardless of whether application was made alone or tank mixed with oat. But the only thing that this product should not be used when you are using Elliot variety or if the crop is less than 2 year old. So with that, I would like to conclude my presentation and want to thank you all of the funding resources as well as the growers where I'm doing my research work and my awesome lab members who are doing all that work, because without them, I think I cannot do anything. So with that, I can have any question.
That was perfect timing. Thank you so much, Sushi. We really appreciated having you. And I don't see any questions in the chat yet. So if you have questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat, or you're welcome to unmute your microphone if you'd like. And while we're waiting for any questions to roll in, I'll turn it back over to Lays to wrap us up for today. Thank you again, Sushi.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Miranda. Thanks, everyone. That was really great. If anyone has any questions, just like Miranda said, go ahead and put them in the chat since we have our experts here still, and it's really nice to have experts available to us. Andrea Long asks, I would like to know more about the traps for the Drosophilia, the SWD. Elizabeth, would you mind helping her out?
Sure. I don't know if it would be easiest just to answer the questions, but sure, what questions do you have? Or you can type them.
Yeah, she may be typing them, but she just wants to know more. How to DIY one? How to make one yourself?
That is a great question. So I guess the easiest thing to do, I was going to say peanut butter container, but it's hard to get the peanut butter out. It's always kind of sticky. Those deli containers, like if you get a takeout 32-ounce deli container, you can buy them at Gordon Food Supply, probably online somewhere. But you can just take one of those, put some red duct tape around it, stab some holes in it. You want the holes to be small, because if the holes are big, then wasps and other beetles can get in there and they fall in the trap and they just really start to smell because they drown and die. So you want the holes to be small enough that these little fruit flies can get in, but nothing else. And just put a little apple cider vinegar in the bottom of that, either a 1-to-4 ratio. So that would be 25% apple cider vinegar or 100% apple cider vinegar. It's not that expensive, but depending on how many traps you need to put together, and just hang those. So you'd poke a hole in the top, and I guess the hanger could be a little bit complicated, but something that will allow you to hang it in the canopy of the blueberries or whatever the small fruit is that you're focusing in. That would be the easiest. But I will say, Andrea, if you want to drop your email in the chat here, I will email you a fact sheet that we have. And it goes, there's like videos where people have put together how to make your own trap and where to get the supplies. It's definitely not hard to do. It's very doable. So hopefully that will be helpful. That was a really long-winded answer.
No, it was wonderful. We still have 7 minutes. We can learn a lot in 7 minutes, Elizabeth. If you don't mind, Elizabeth, instead of just giving that information to Andrea, and I don't want to put pressure on you, but if you could look that up and put it in the chat as a link, that'd be super helpful to other people. Thank you. Oh, see, Deborah just asked.
Okay, yes. So I have to confess, y'all, this is a fact sheet that I put together when I was still at Ohio State. So don't hate whenever you see the link is an Ohio State one.
There's no hate. But
it's good. It's good.
Yeah, we love all extension. No worries. Oh, Jeff covered you. Jeff's got you. He also, it's the University of New Hampshire.
It looks like. Okay.
Is that
I'll drop the link to this other one in there just because.
Thank you. I'm glad. Anybody else? Like I said, we have 6 minutes. We have experts here waiting online for all your questions. Deborah asked a good question. I'd like to start growing blueberries. Should I get my soil tested? I don't know who would be the best person to answer that. I'll let you decide.
I can just jump in and say, yes, I would recommend getting your soil tested, whether you're growing blueberries or any other fruit crop, but particularly blueberries, just because they're really sensitive to pH. And I will stick a link in the chat for some laboratories that you can send in your soil to. But yes, I would definitely recommend doing that.
All right. Thank you everyone so much for being here. I love learning about fruit. It makes me want to go grow all the fruits. But anyways, thank you so much, everyone.